The cafe is open, and tonight we have to talk about be ready for God. We have to be ready. And since it's all about food and cafes, be ready. We've got mixing bowls and beaters, and we're going to talk about some food, because this is all about cafe stuff. Well, I just wanted to tell you that I have come to see you all the way from Israel. I am one of the ladies from the Israelites, and this looks a lot like my home where I live. I live in a tent because my family are nomads. That means that we have to move about. So if we lived in a big brick house, we could pick that house up and move it on a moment's notice, could we? No way. But a tent? Oh yes. We could take a tent down and we could be ready to move really, really fast. Because the story I have to tell you talks about the time that the Israelites had to be ready. Y'all think about that for a minute. Be ready for God. Can you say that with me? Be ready for God. All right. Well, we lived in tents. We had big fire pits. We had to cook all of our food outside. Because if we lived in a tent, we didn't have H&R range, did we? No, we did not. We cooked over an open fire. Well, I've got to tell you this story about something that happened in my life a long, long time ago. But even before I was born, that's when the story really got started. Because you see, way, way back, thousands and thousands of years ago, God chose a man named Abraham. Abraham was going to be the leader of a great nation, and everybody that was related to him. Y'all have people that are related to you, don't you? Your cousins, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your mom, your dad. Those are all your relatives. So all of Abraham's relatives were going to be part of a special group, the Israelites, and they were God's chosen people. Well, now, you know, in every story, there's always tension. And in my story, the tension got started with the Egyptians. The Egyptian leader, he was a pharaoh. And a pharaoh is sort of like a king, the ruler of the country. Well, the pharaoh got real nervous about all the Israelites because there were so many of us. And he started thinking, now I just need to do something to get those Israelites in line, because if I let them get too bossy, they have to take over my country. So what do you think that Egyptian Pharaoh did? He decided to make all the people, all the Israelites, slaves. And it was hard for my family. Everybody had to work and do exactly what the Egyptians told us. And those were tough, tough times for my ancestors. For hundreds of years this went on. And my people prayed to God all the time to help them, to make life easier. Well, God chose another special person, and this man's name was Moses. And Moses was chosen to lead our people out of slavery. The Israelites followed God, and Moses was one of God's special helpers. Well, now God promised to help the Israelites find a new land and a safe place to live, but they had to follow God. They had to always be ready. God told them to listen and to be ready to move when God told them to. That's why we lived in tents. We didn't know when we were going to get the sign from God that we had to pick up and go. So we were always ready to move. And at long last, God chose a special night to help us escape. I was just a little girl, kind of about Riley's size or maybe Ann's size when all this happened. I was little, but I remember that just like it was yesterday. God gave Moses instructions for the last meal that we were ever going to eat in Egypt. And that was a special celebration for us. And that meal was called the Passover meal. Say that, Passover meal. Passover meal. Yes, that was our last meal that we ate Well, that meal was real special. It was very special because we knew we were about to escape. And there were 3 things that we were told by God to prepare. We had our big open pit, and we were told to roast one perfect lamb. So we roasted the meat on the open fire, and God told us, do not throw any of that meat away. If you have more than your family can eat, share it. Share it with your friends and share it with your neighbors. And he also gave us instructions about something called bitter herbs. Herbs are plants that we use the leaves to cook with. I bet y'all have heard of putting oregano in the spaghetti sauce, or putting cilantro in the salsa, or rosemary on chicken. These are herbs. And God instructed us to gather the herbs for the cooking. But a really, really important thing that we were told was about the bread. So now I told you guys, we got to be ready. And you see these mixing bowls over here? Well, there's something special about baking bread. There is an ingredient that's called yeast. And what do you think the yeast does to bread? What?
It inflates it up.
It what?
Inflates it up.
Yes, it makes it grow and expand and get bigger. You can take your flour and your water and oil and put yeast in it, mix it together, and you may start out with a little ball of bread dough about this big, and you put it in a bowl in a warm place, come back in a few hours, and that little ball will now be about like this big. Where you start out thinking you've got one little tiny loaf of bread, no, you're going to have a huge loaf. Now look, if you make bread with yeast, the bread's going to look like this. If you make bread without yeast, it'll be flat. And this is what we call unleavened bread. And that's the kind of bread that we made. We could not wait on that yeast because, great day, what if we mix up our dough and we put yeast in it and we've got to wait for it to rise up? But then God says it's time for you to go. We can't live without bread. So we came up with the plan of the unleavened bread, no yeast. And that even became a custom in our homes. We didn't have yeast in our homes, and that was really important. So, bread with yeast makes fluffy rolls. Bread without yeast makes unleavened bread or flat rolls. So for this final meal, we got everything together. Everyone was ready to eat, but we were also told, put on your coats, put on your sandals, have your walking stick in hand, you have your flat loaf of bread, and we put the meat and the herbs on top of it because we knew at any moment we had to go. Now, when y'all eat supper, do you get your plate and put your coat on and your shoes and go stand by the front door? No. Y'all eat at the table on a plate and have a glass? Yeah. Well, you can do that because you're not waiting for a sign from God to tell you that you have to move. Well, after eating this meal, we were so excited and we left Egypt in such a rush. We were running because we were actually running for our lives. The Egyptians were chasing us. They were dead on our heels. But we weren't afraid because we knew that God was with us. We had a long journey to the Promised Land, and that journey took us 40 years. Well, now every year there's a celebration called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. People make bread, but what do they leave out? Yeast. Exactly. No yeast in the unleavened bread. Does this dough rise up? No. There's no yeast to make it rise. When we celebrate birthdays, we have cakes. When God's people celebrate this special day, they eat thin bread. God's people stayed ready because they were listening to God and they moved when God told them to. So just like the Israelites, we need to listen to God and we need to be ready to go when when God wants us to. Our story tonight about the Israelites leaving Egypt is called the Exodus. And there's a book in the Bible, in the front part of the Bible, Exodus. And our story came from chapter 13, verses 3 through 10. So I would encourage you to look that verse up, check it out. It's a great story. It's a lot better to read it in the Bible than to hear it from me. Okay? Thank you for listening. I'll see you later.